Hi, I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud, and I'm the new social media specialist for TVO's Current Affairs and Documentaries Department. And I'm here today to talk to Andray Domise, who ran in the recent municipal elections here in Toronto. Andray, thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I have to start off by asking you, you ran in Toronto's Ward 2, which is a home base of the Ford family. What was that like running against the Fords?
Man, it was an emotional roller coaster of sorts. I mean, there was a whole lot of issues that we had to discuss in this neighborhood, and a whole lot of conversations that I think we did a good job bringing media attention to. Everything from bigotry and racism to homophobia to poverty and income inequality. Those are all issues that are pertinent to Ward 2 and issues that need attention and unpacking. So while we didn't get the result we wanted, at the same time we did bring to light many of those issues. And now the media narrative about Ward 2 is that it's essentially a ward that the Fords neglected and practically forgot. Now, we don't have a couple decades worth of recognition. We don't have international celebrity with this campaign. What we did have was just a lot of hardworking volunteers. Obviously, name recognition counts for a lot in municipal politics. So I get that it was a tough thing to do to try and overcome the Ford brand here in Etobicoke. But this is not, a project that's going to get done in a couple of months. It's going to take years to start empowering the community to speak up with its own voices. So even though I may not have won the city council seat, I can do a lot of work out here in Etobicoke just to make sure that people get it's their neighborhood, their ward. It doesn't belong to the Fords. It belongs to them. To try and get voter engagement happening, try to make sure that we get some mentorship for the young people out here, and try to heal some of these issues out here in Ward 2.
Now, you were running against Rob Ford's 20-year-old nephew, Michael,
Yeah.
and then suddenly Rob dropped out of the mayor's race and ran for council in Ward 2. How did you react when that happened?
It was to put it in video game terms, it's almost like playing a Konami game, and the mid-level boss you're fighting, and all of a sudden the final boss just jumps right out. And
Right.
even though we had planned for that eventuality, I mean, we did say from the get-go that there was always a possibility if Rob was not doing well in the mayor's race, that he might just jump into the city council race instead. We did have to be prepared for that eventuality, but there's nothing that we can really do aside from bring attention to the issues and get out there and have conversations with every single voter. And what I will say is that when you, as a candidate, and especially a progressive candidate, are out there doing the work of having difficult conversations with people, talking about the need for childcare, and if your city councilor is voting against expanded childcare funding, that's going to be a problem. If we're out there talking about, well, if your city councilor is literally engaging in acts of racism and bringing young men into a life that their parents did not prepare them for, I mean, those are conversations that are really difficult to digest and doesn't normally happen in any other election cycle. Those aren't normal election issues. So I get how challenging it is for a lot of people to have those conversations and then not be sort of disillusioned with politics altogether and say, you know what, forget all this, I'm going to stay home. But we were willing to go out and have that conversation. And like I said, it's going to take a few years for us to connect the dots between if your city councilor is voting against you and helping to, I guess, deconstruct your community this way by saying no to every single effort that could possibly help you. And at the same time, here's how you can help yourself. Get engaged. Get out there and engage in the youth mentorship programs. Get out there and vote. And here's who you should vote for. And these are the qualifications somebody should have before you vote. I mean, we're going to spend a long time, I guess, on doing some of that damage here, but it's a job we're willing to take on.
So you mentioned in your first answer, and this is something that has come up quite a bit in a few media outlets, that there's been some people have noticed similarities between the vote distribution and income distribution lines across the city in terms of the votes that the Fords got and the votes that John Tory got. So there's a story to be told about class and how the votes break down. How has that been especially real for you as you campaigned?
We paid really close attention to that. Ward 2 has a median income about $10,000 lower than the rest of Toronto, and it's got a poverty rate of about 25%. And if you look at the breakdown of, I mean, it doesn't quite exactly overlap, but there, I think, is a case to be made there where, affluent neighborhoods voted for John Tory, and I guess middle-class income neighborhoods voted for Olivia Chow, and the lower-class income voted for Doug Ford. And I think part of it is just having created the narrative that Doug Ford fights for the people. And if people aren't willing to scratch below the surface and understand that, well, someone says I'm going to stop waste at City Hall, you have to get what he's talking about here. He's not talking about like city councilors putting money into their own pocket or being in the pocket of developers. What he's talking about is the programs that could help you and your family. That's what he calls a waste of taxpayer dollars. Where it comes to childcare, where it comes to youth mentorship, where it comes to transit access, where it comes to helping fund some not-for-profit agencies, that's what they call a waste of taxpayer dollars. And I think we need to have more honest conversations about that.
Now, you actually, on that note, you wrote a piece earlier this year criticizing those in the African Canadian communities who supported the Fords. How did African Canadians that you spoke to on the campaign trail react to that? How did they take it?
There was a bit of a split reaction. So there were a lot of people who said, you know what, thanks for saying what needed to be said. I actually had a call from a couple of MPPs and an MP who said, you know what, congratulations for getting that out there because that's something that needs to be said in the community. So there were a lot of people who were really happy about that. At the same time, there were a lot of people who were really upset and said, you know, how could you attack these people who helped us so much? But I think people who say this, the whole thing about the Fords having helped us and fighting for us, haven't actually looked at what their voting record is. And it's easy to believe this narrative that these guys are out here fighting for the little guy because it's not challenging personally. If you happen to like their personality, and you happen to like the way that they present politics, it's easy to overlook what kind of damage they've done. So for those people who have said, you know, shame on you for having attacked the Fords, I say, well, shame on you for not paying attention to what they've done to our neighborhoods.
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute because you also wrote that people who supported the Fords are people who legitimately feel like they're let down by their government, right? And so, what do you hope to see marginalized voters do in order to, I guess, fix their communities instead of voting for the Fords, which you see as damaging?
To be honest, I mean, somebody asked me the other day whether young people have a reason to vote or why it is that they're not voting. And I said, to be honest, because we don't really give them a reason. And when I say we, I'm talking about we as politicians. Personally, I haven't made a dime off of politics. I just jumped into the race because I wanted to help my neighborhood. But I think that what Toronto's political class has to pay attention to is that they are themselves marginalizing certain communities. Because if somebody calls you from the local neighborhood and says, look, I live in the PCHC building and I'm just having this problem with Toronto community housing, or I've been having this problem with my landlord, or I'm having this issue in my neighborhood where this guy's hanging out on the corner and nothing's being done about that. You can't just, as a city councilor, enact some policy and then call it a day. You actually have to go down to where the problem is and connect with your residents. And I think that's something the Fords have done a really, really good job of. I will take my hat off to them because they at least get that people need that personal touch. They need to feel connected to their government. Where it comes to, you know, why it is that people continue to vote regardless, you know, I have a really hard time with this conversation because I was kind of there myself. Just, you know what, forget it. What's the point of even voting? And if you look at a lot of studies that have been done on Canadian voter habits, in positive elections where the issues stay positive and you know, politicians don't get cynical, voter turnout tends to be higher. But when cynicism enters the system and we get into this sort of negative campaigning mode, unless there's a really, really serious issue for people to come out about, then voter turnout tends to be low. And that's because voters will say, you know what, forget these guys, they're all the same. I think that's something that we forget, is that unless you're out there, I'm not just talking about shaking hands and kissing babies, I'm not just talking about making the appearances. I mean, when the cameras are off, are you out there in the neighborhoods talking with people, understanding their issues? Are you showing up to community celebrations? Are you showing up to funerals and vigils? That's the kind of stuff that people really remember, and that's what counts in the long run. And I feel like in Toronto specifically, we haven't done that, and we don't do that for certain communities. The outlying suburbs and communities of color tend to get a lot less of that personal touch than people in other neighborhoods.
So that's a lot of, you know, those are a lot of forms of taking of efforts in order to thwart that particular wave that you see happening. How
Yeah.
optimistic are you that efforts like that are going to take place, given the strong showing, I think, that the Fords had on Monday's election?
Here's what I think might happen. There's a couple of possible outcomes here. There is the outcome where we learn something from the last 4 years, where we pay attention to the fact that there are a lot of people who did feel so disaffected that they felt polarized towards Doug Ford. If you start looking at what the Fords were able to tap into over the last several years and try to co-opt that, so you offer that personal touch. You let them know that their issues are. You say, I'm going to go ahead and fight for this issue. Don't make promises that you obviously cannot deliver on, but at the very least, engage people in what's important to them. I think that can help, where you look at what's happened in the last 4 years, acknowledge it, and then try to heal some of those divisions. The other option is where we use this election as a referendum on the last 4 years, and then just try to sweep all of that circus under the rug. The problem is we've revealed some really deep and ugly underlying divisions between communities as far as class, income, race, gender, sexual preference, and sexual identity. You have a school board trustee out here making very openly, like, brazen, transphobic, and homophobic remarks. And thankfully, he was defeated at the ballot, but he was allowed to continue with that issue, that stuff unabated for years. You have a city councilor that just dips out to certain neighborhoods, and if he feels like you spend too much money on a particular project, then he's going to try and trash that project, even though it may have benefits to the community. So if you don't address that stuff and you try to heal it, and you don't, start looking at appointing people from certain neighborhoods in certain areas to act as community liaisons, to make the members of the community feel more connected with their government. You don't do that, you just try to sweep everything under the rug. We're going to have another one of these elections in the next 4 years, where we then say, well, do you want the politics of, for city councilors and the mayor who just caters to the needs of the rich? And you've got the other option out here where you've got people who are involved with the Fords fighting for the people. Or are we going to have ballot questions that are about more than just Ford politics versus normal city politics? Are we going to have ballot questions about solving income inequality? We're going to have ballot questions about solving some of these gender issues and racial issues. I think we can do that, but we need to have some grown-up conversations.
I think either way you put it, you have a lot of work cut out for you. So is there anything else you'd like to add today?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've said a heck of a lot more than I intended to in the first place. I mean, this is a whole lot of stuff that we've got to unpack and refute in the next 4 years. What I will say, though, is that I'm not going anywhere. I don't know that my future lies in politics. It's only a few days afterwards, so I'm still letting the dust settle. But at the very least, the youth engagement projects that I've been working on, for example, Textdale, where we're going to have kids, instead of just sitting at home playing video games, we're going to bring professionals to the neighborhood to help teach them how to make video games, everything from software development to coding to, as a matter of fact, we actually had a company approach us the other day and say, hey, by the way, we're running short of people who are proficient in AutoCAD. Why don't we get kids interested in those kinds of drafting programs? And I said, well, this is going to take a little while to pitch young people on AutoCAD, but we'll see how we can work that in. As far as recreation out here, there's not really a heck of a lot offered aside from small community efforts. So we are going to be doing a lot of work to bring recreation out to Rexdale and Ward 2 specifically. So that's what I'm engaged in right now, and hopefully we can use that to help address some of these community issues.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with us today, and best of luck with those projects.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Andre.
Take care.